studies. So throughout this, think in the broad picture of using the methodology as a whole, but also specifically how we can implement this within our regular qualitative practices. So just as a review, I know from our conversations on Monday, we have some new researchers. We also have some researchers in here who might not be too familiar with the grounded theory paradigm. I'm just gonna go over it a little bit. It was founded around the 1960s by Strauss and Glaser. It's been refined into a more modern method by Kathy Sharmas with the help of also Strauss and Juliet Colvin, who was a student of Strauss. This is an inductive process. It's building from the ground up. So we're looking at the data and then building on top of that data in order to create a theory. If you look at the flow chart from on the side here, you will see that there's a spiral process that continuously happens. You collect data, you rigorously code the data, and then you go back, oh, well, let me see what other samples of data do I need in order to help support these codes and categories that I see emerging. So you go back, you collect data, you code again, and then you go back through the theoretical sampling, what else can I use, and so on and so forth, until you start to see a theory develop. So key components of grounded theory. Like I was saying, analysis is the most important part of this entire process, which is what I'm emphasizing today, in the sense that grounded theory is huge, it's very, very rigorous, but there are different components of it that I personally have applied to my own case study research that has actually helped me interact with the data a lot more closely than just regular thematic applications. So today we're talking a lot about epistemological considerations, and we want to find the knowledge within the data that we collect and look really, really deeply at specific words and actions that are emerging from it. And this continuously collects throughout this analysis project. This particular approach is interesting because we enter it without actually any themes in mind. So most of us are very well versed in descriptive studies or case studies, survey study research, where we have research questions or several research questions that guide us. And a lot of the time, there are themes that are already present within our research questions that we apply to the data. In this inductive method, we do it the opposite way. So we go in with a very broad research question, and then we go ahead and find themes that emerge from the data that we collect. So the collecting and theoretical sampling of various data happens continuously. It could be interviews, could be primary source documents, it could be observations. Those are not predetermined either. Throughout this process, we also go through a reflexivity kind of self-indulging process too, for lack of a better term, where we're always sitting there and we're memoing and documenting and journaling what our feelings are about the data, how we see the data connecting, how other theories that we know that are somewhat related to our topic could be related to the data that's coming out. Sharma likes to present this as memoing. She likes to term it as memoing. For those of us well-versed in ethnomusicology, and that's what I was initially trained in, this is just field notes. It's like a diary. The methodology itself is very rigorous. The coding requires you to take the specific words within the data sets and turn them into action verbs. You also want to pull as many live quotes out of the text as possible, whether it be from your observation notes, from primary source documents, or from interviews. And this happens line by line, so you can see the action within each sentence. By doing this, you develop categories. So those codes get categorized into different topics. And then from that it develops into a theme. As you can see here, this is actually a previous project that I did. It was a singular case study on a woman band director. And I was investigating how do code switching tendencies manifest from a woman secondary band director when instructing students from the podium position. So I started with 700 codes. That's a lot. I reduced them because I saw many of them overlap into 100, which then I was able to place into about 18 different categories. And if you look at the categories, you'll see a lot of INGs all the way through. So that's part of that gerund of the coding process. Within that became working themes, and then the themes turned into 2 intersecting ideas that helped me develop a working theory about how code switching manifests. So right now I'd like to talk about the pros and cons about using this particular research methodology. The biggest pro that I feel personally from my own research practices is how close you get to the disclosure of human identity and the knowledge and their personal knowledge within our own participants. Identity politics are incredibly important in our lives right now. In the US specifically, at the moment, we have the Black Lives Matter movement. We still have Me Too. And each one of our societies probably has a very specific movement related to human identity that is taking forth right now. People value parts of their identities in different ways. And we need to be very careful with that, particularly with regard to gender, sexuality, and ethnicity, as those are at the moment are very heightened topics. The amount of which we value these parts, whether us personally or our participants, when working with humans they become really important. And to us, we can actually take our own values and place them on other people if we're not careful. So within this specific methodology, if we're staying really true and close to the words of our participants, it actually prevents us from applying our own values onto their own identities. And this is really important when you're working with underrepresented populations or vulnerable populations. Also, when we're disclosing identity, we also capture a glimpse through the process of the disclosure, I should probably say, we're capturing glimpses into people's worlds. We see their personal attributes, we see their philosophies, their politics, and so on and so forth. So that becomes really important, but that also gets at the essence of the story that this person is telling us with regard to what we want to capture in order to answer our research questions. Keep in mind that our knowledge is shaped by our social worlds. The way we speak, the way we behave, are all part of how we construct and interpret our knowledge, and that shapes us as individuals, it shapes our participants as individuals, and it also shapes just the environment itself. We see all this starting to come through fruition through the actual sampling of data and theoretical sampling, specifically in interviews and observations. The data points can also help capture emotions. They can capture the human ability to just have feelings within their environment. Within this, it's very rigorous, the particular coding process, and that actually helps to capture more of those little tiny details. And like I said, obviously this becomes a very advantageous methodology to use when documenting human interaction. And we can also use parts of this within our own research. So a couple of cons that I'd like to bring up, and we'll probably talk more about this with Ruth. It ain't over till it's over. It's something that goes on and on and on till the data is saturated, and we can actually build a theory that is heavily supported by specific themes and specific experiences of these individuals. Through that, we have a big commitment to the people in which we were researching. We built trusted relationships, which we spoke about yesterday, and that we have to do justice to those particular individuals that are part of this. It's practical reasons, best done with funding for other researchers and transcribers. There's also a large amount of findings, which is also best for book publication rather than journal publication. Most importantly, and I know some of you might be snickering about this, many of you have known Cliff Madsen for a long time. One of his famous quotes are, "You control the environment in which controls you." And there's a lot of flexibility within this particular study. So that also can be a cause of concern. So my time is up, but I would like you to consider this, and these are actually things that we can talk about in the roundtable part. What ethical issues have you come across with regard to participant identity disclosure, and how have you solved those within your research?